There are two constants in the Murder Drones fandom. The first is that there'll be at least one character that any given person finds hot, don't deny it. The second is that Envy and Nuzi shippers are doomed to fight over which ship is better, whether it be meaningful and nuanced discussion about the dynamics and pros and cons of each relationship, to violent insults, harassment, and death threats. The debate over which robot should kiss is one that's ravaged the Murder Drones fandom ever since the very first episode. Even now, after all 8 episodes have been released and En and Uzi's relationship has well been confirmed, you still have a few particularly determined Envy shippers who insist that the relationship between the two was meant to be a thing before it got retconned by Liam Vickers. However, is that truly the case, or was the ship doomed to sink from the beginning? Without further ado, let's get into how Envy was doomed to fail. Before we get into why Envy's romantic relationship was doomed to fail, I think it'd be smart to go over how their relationship is shown to develop in the show proper. In the very first episode, it's established rather clearly that En has a friend, with him being somewhat embarrassed about it. However, we're also shown that V is incredibly rude towards En, not even being bothered to remember the single letter that is his name, and based on the lack of reaction to J slapping him later in the episode, is heavily implied to have been complicit in Jay's abuse. The very first episode shows very clearly that En and V's relationship is a one-sided crush that V doesn't care about. Episode 2, on the other hand, is a bit more interesting, as at the beginning we get a flashback to a time before the events of the series, when En and V were worker drones serving a family of humans. In that flashback, it's implied the two had mutual crushes on each other, what with their flustered blushes and the literal spark that flies between them. Yet, other than that, we don't get many relevant actions between the two. However, at the very end, after En and Nuzi had their breakup, we see that V has broken out of her chains. However, rather than taking the opportunity to escape, she instead hides the broken chain from En, which suggests that she may still care about him in some way. Come episode 3, and we see En and V fighting over an ideological conflict. V wants to go and commit a massacre at prom, whereas En just wants to leave the workers alone. However, as the argument escalates, En confronts V with a question. Do they even know what they are? A question which causes V to go silent and simply asks that En and Uzi stop prying into that stuff. Eventually, however, she loses patience and abandons En, chopping his head off to prevent him from following her and leaving him with the words,
"What's best for you, even if you hate me for it."
This episode does a lot of heavy lifting for V's character, implying that she may know more about their current situation than she lets on and is actively hiding this information. Which possibly recontextualizes her past behavior and may give a more complex motive for her actions. During episode 4, we get one of the most impactful scenes for both characters and their relationship. When the two are debating whether or not they should kill Uzi, En repeatedly insists that Uzi is scared, doesn't know what's happening, and that killing her won't solve anything, while V insists that they just do their jobs and be left alone. However, En replies that he doesn't know what she's talking about because she won't tell him, and then asks her what she's so afraid of, and V, she can't answer. This scene does a lot and manages to get across the message that V may have a more complex characterization than meets the eye. Episode 5 is where everything is laid bare and we get to understand the truth behind Bee's character and what happened to her and N's relationship, as it's revealed that the monstrous disassembly drones were once normal worker drones in the employment of the Elliot family before they had their bodies augmented and minds wiped by the Absolute Solver, with V being the only one of the trio who still has memory of this, and all of the hiding and lying being as a result of her wanting to keep N in blissful ignorance. Episode 6 comes with the culmination of Bee's arc, where she sacrifices herself to ensure the other characters can safely make it to the bottom of the labs. Throughout the show, Bee's main motivation was to keep N safe. She tried to keep Nuzi away from N, at first because she thought she was a distraction, and later because she was Solver infected and a potential threat. However, here, with this sacrifice, V is admitting that she trusts N to take care of himself and trusts Nuzi as a friend, effectively absolving herself of all of her past actions. V doesn't directly appear in episode 7, however, that doesn't mean the episode doesn't do anything for her and N's characters. When N, Uzi, and Tessa land in the mines, Rebel falls over the door to the elevator, trapping them down there. However, N tries to break through the rocks to get to the elevator, clearly trying to get back to V. In the moment, he even seems to forget about Uzi. Later, when he's trapped under the rubble, the Solver finds him and attempts to taunt him using a hologram of V from when she was a worker, showing that even if he's falling out of love with her, he ultimately still cares about her as a friend. And finally, in episode 8, we get the callback scene. When V comes down the hallway, she pours her heart out to him, confessing her feelings, admitting she was wrong, and letting herself be truly vulnerable for the first time in the series. However, when hearing this, N and Uzi don't know what to do. There's a chance V may have been killed by the Sentinels, but there's also a chance she could have lived. Not to mention, the Solver can perfectly replicate voices and people, so what's to say it isn't a trap? Yet, despite all those variables, N still decides to take the risk by calling out to her, a risk which gets him killed. And when the day has been saved and Uzi is showing off her presentation, N shows V a drawing he made using the help of a Harendown manga book he presumably got from Uzi. And when V receives this, she smiles, cementing not only that they still love each other, even if not romantic love, and providing hope for them to further grow closer in the future. Throughout the show, we are shown that N and V's relationship is one of tragedy, of once close lovers forced apart by time and trauma, who are eventually able to mend their bond through mutual healing and friendship. Now that we're through how the relationship developed in the show, let's begin to discuss the actual nature of the relationship. Firstly, the biggest reason why I think N and V's story couldn't end in romance would be the pacing. At the beginning of the series, N and V's relationship is borderline toxic, with V going out of her way to be cruel and rude to N, and N being too nervous to even have a normal conversation with her. It would be unrealistic to have them go from one wrong step away from hating each other to being lovers in the span of just 8 episodes, alongside all the other plot the show would still have to juggle. The reason why Nuzi works despite this hurdle, however, is because their relationship is integral to the show's story. N's the first disassembly drone Uzi meets, and the two's bond kickstarts their respective arcs and incites the story as a whole. Uzi is integral to the show's plot and provides things V couldn't if the show chose to prioritize N's relationship with her instead of Uzi. The alternative to rushing the story, however, would be to remove the toxic dynamic entirely so that their relationship would be easier to write. And in my opinion, it seems stupid to get rid of such an incredibly nuanced and tragic story just for the sake of pairing two characters together. It would feel cheap and fanficish. To properly develop their relationship in a way that feels satisfying and earned, the show would either have to rush it to hell and back, ignore the conflict entirely, or ignore pretty much everything else in the show in exchange for focusing solely on their dynamic. Not to mention, if the show did try to put them together, the pacing wouldn't be the only thing it'd have to contend with. N and V's relationship is an incredibly well developed and interesting one. However, it also serves a more significant narrative purpose than just being a tragic romance. It also helps to drive and reinforce both characters' arcs and stories. N's main arc is to grow more confident and develop a backbone in the face of mistreatment. This shows itself in his relationship with Lee by how he reacts to her lying and keeping the truth from him. In episode 1, he is deep in the friend zone, ignoring how V goes out of her way to disrespect him and continues to crush on her despite it, to the point it takes Uzi spelling it out for him to realize that the treatment isn't normal and that she probably doesn't love him back. In episode 4, their relationship reaches a breaking point as they have differing beliefs on how to handle Uzi during her solver meltdown. V believes she should be killed, while N believes she can be helped. Here, N comes to the realization that him and V have fundamental conflicts of interest, and that with her refusing to tell him what's going on, he simply can't trust her. This is also when I believe N began to develop feelings for Uzi. Episode 6 is where V sacrifices herself to see to it that the rest of the group can get to safety, completing her own arc, but also bringing up something about N that a lot of people, whether on the side of Envy or Nuzi, don't really acknowledge. Despite how he can get frustrated at and upset with her, N never grows to hate V. He still cares about her, and especially at the beginning of episode 7, doesn't want to see her get hurt or die, going as far as to forget about how Uzi is hurt, despite the fact that at this point, he's clearly in love with her. Even though N doesn't love V romantically, he still cares about her as a friend, and this is something I think the wider fandom often fails to realize. V's arc is to heal from her trauma and learn to treat N better, and having her end up with N despite the way she's treated him would only send the message that she can still get what she wants without having to try. And losing his crush on her gives her consequences, makes her realize that she's in the wrong, and gives her a reason to want to try to improve. If he still loved her despite that, she would have no reason to want to change and would never progress in her arc. In episode 3, N asking V what they even are causes her to stop and think about why she's doing this in the first place, and she gives him a non-answer by telling him to stop prying into it. And in episode 4, he asked her what she was so afraid of, clearly not taking no for an answer and showing V that he wasn't going to take her behavior lying down. He even goes as far as to get physical, to the point V seems genuinely surprised to see him fighting back. She needed that reality check in order to give her motive behind treating him better and moving to a healthier spot in their relationship. Ed's arc is to grow more confident and learn to stand up for himself, so having him keep his crush on V would make his development much more shallow, and having them end up together after all she had done to him would make it feel like N was still giving in to his biggest flaws despite his development. It would make his arc feel like a flat circle and make him a much shallower character. By having the two fall out, it gives V a reason to see the flaws in her ways and want to work to improve, and it encourages N to strengthen his resolve and learn to stand up for himself. Keeping them together, on the other hand, would give no one reason to want to change and would make their development feel rushed and nonsensical. Throughout the show, especially in episodes 1 through 4, their relationship with each other is borderline toxic and not something I could see ever becoming a healthy romance. Maybe post episode 8, I could see a hypothetical timeline where, say, Uzi and Lizzie die tragically and N and V bond over the shared losses of their respective partners. Actually, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Write that down. So, if this is what N and V's relationship is like, then what is N and Uzi's relationship like? N's relationship with Uzi is night and day compared to his relationship with V. From their very first scene together, we already see Uzi caring for N's well-being when she hears about the abuse he suffered and encouraging him to stand up for himself. Later in the same episode, she saves N's life after his confrontation with Jay and helps him clap back at her before their fight. Even before they've developed much of a relationship, heck, right after she just learned he isn't a bloodthirsty animal, she cares about him, even if more on principle than on a personal level. In episode 3, she's willing to put the past behind them and forgive him so they can work together to save Tom. And in episode 4, she cares about him so much that she was willing to run away to a dilapidated cabin just to avoid scaring him with her oil lust. Throughout the events of the show, Uzi shows more respect and care for N than V ever does, and she's the catalyst that kickstarts his arc of confidence. Yet, the first thing we see V do is forget N's name, brush off his feelings, and is heavily implied to have been complicit in Jay's abuse. In episode 3, she disregards his feelings to go murder on the dance floor, and in episode 4, she explicitly betrays him by trying to kill Uzi, his friend. However, this isn't to say V is some heartless monster who only hurts N and doesn't deserve love. V's actions are driven by her trauma and desire to keep N safe, and there are multiple moments when you can tell she cares about him, and her general ambivalence and sadism is just a facade. Heck, in episode 8, when she realizes she's been tricked by Sin and that N is dead, she's nearly on the brink of crying, and when Sin is about to eat his core, she nearly panics. V's behavior towards N may have been cruel, but she cares deeply about his feelings and well-being. Treating him the way she did hurt her just as much as it hurt him, yet that doesn't make her innocent either. N and Uzi have a consistent track record of treating each other with love and respect. They care about one another and consistently go out of their way to express that care. V, however, has had a constant track record of disrespecting N's feelings and wants, brushing him off and going behind his back. Even if she had a justifiable reason to do it, to keep him safe, that doesn't negate the harm her actions had, which I think is something a large portion of the fandom tends to ignore. V's motives are reasonable, noble even. She wanted to protect someone she loved from an omnipotent eldritch threat. However, that doesn't mean her methods, hiding things from N, lying to him, going behind his back, and treating him like he was lesser, were okay. Something I think a lot of people forget is that the characters don't have the same perspective we do. From N's perspective, V was someone who was cruel, violent, disrespectful, and selfish. So when he was presented with someone kind, respectful, and who actually cared about him, he had a right to choose her over me. Speaking of speaking of the fandom, Envy is one of the best written tragic romances I've seen put to screen, and it's just a shame that the fandom can't do them that same justice. The biggest issue I've noticed in the fandom when it comes to Envy's relationship is the way the fandom ignores the nuance present within the characters. At its most obnoxious, you have people characterizing N as some two-timing womanizer who went behind V's back. Uzi is some man-stealing whore who intentionally tried to split N and V apart. And V is some jealous, bitter ex trying to get back at her old boyfriend. While at its least obnoxious, N is an emotional support puppy who only exists to baby the women in his life. Uzi is some pick-me who only cares about hopping on N's non-existent robo-dick, and V is a jealous ex desperately trying to keep a rein on her boyfriend. Envy fans have a big issue with demonizing Uzi, often ignoring her deeper character and her motivations behind certain actions to make her sound as evil as possible so they can desperately patch the holes in their sinking ship. For example, during episode 4, you would see a lot of people claim that Uzi was only crying crocodile tears to make N pity her and avoid taking accountability for her actions, completely ignoring that Uzi had just gone through the traumatic experience of having her body augmented by the solver and was already feeling insecure due to her classmates' actions and V's taunts. Some even go as far as to say her behavior here was abusive, which I think really shows what I'm trying to get at. I think a lot of Envy shippers hold opinions like these because a lot of them still believe that N was in love with N during the events of the show, even though never once her behaviors express anything that could be considered romantic attraction. You still have people acting like she and N were basically already a couple and that he was being unfaithful by falling in love with Nuzi. Now, she does blush in episode 5, and out of context, I could see that being interpreted as her still having feelings for him. However, as part of a larger whole, it could just as easily be interpreted as a blush out of embarrassment or even anger. Another common take is that N's crush on V was retconned, or him falling out of love with her was out of character. Yet, to have this take means to ignore how V treated N, to make his criticism of her behavior seem unwarranted or uncalled for. Yet, at several moments in the show, V shows clear disregard for N's feelings and emotional well-being. Yes, she does do it to keep him safe, but that still doesn't excuse the impact her actions had. N felt insulted, betrayed, and humiliated. She went behind his back and kept important secrets from him. She literally tried to kill his best friend and the first person who made him feel validated. Like I said earlier, N is in the right to prioritize his own happiness over his loyalty to an old crush. However, Nuzi fans aren't completely off the hook either. While this has gotten better as time went on, during the show you would see Nuzi fans needlessly demonize V, ignoring the nuance behind her actions to make her out to be this evil, obsessive monster who only cared about keeping N under her thumb by any means necessary. For example, during the cabin scene with Uzi in episode 4, and just during episode 4 in general, people saw her threatening Uzi's life and later attempting to kill her to be an act of jealousy rather than an act of wanting to keep Ed safe. Although you can't really blame people for coming to that conclusion, as for the first few episodes, she was kind of characterized as a heartless monster, with her true nature only being fully revealed in episode 5. So, why is this? Why is Envy the target of so much misinterpretation and mischaracterization by the fandom? Well, I think it has to do with the simple fact that the fandom is kinda stupid. Or when I say stupid, I more so mean immature. Like the cast of the show, this fandom is primarily composed of teenagers, and teenagers love edgy ideas. So, when presented with a dynamic like Envy's, two young lovers tragically separated by a series of events out of either's control, of course people are going to take it and try to turn it into a melodramatic soap opera style love triangle, which is how you end up with takes like V wanting Uzi dead because she was jealous, or Uzi being some homewrecker who intentionally tried to split N and V apart. To me, this displays a rather immature and 12-year-old on Wattpad view of relationships. The idea that someone can only fall in love with one person during their entire life and that anything else is basically cheating, which makes sense as, once again, this fandom is full of teenagers. It's especially a shame that discussion of this ship is so drenched in petty fandom drama, because this relationship is actually somewhat of an accomplishment. You don't typically see stories of ex lovers who are able to remain friends despite no longer being in love, so if anything, it's impressive that Murder Drones is able to handle such a story so maturely without falling into typical romance or love triangle tropes. N and B's love life is tragic, not just in the way it's handled in the show, but in the way it's treated by the fandom. To see such a well executed portrayal of two people falling out of love twisted and mangled beyond recognition by a fandom that only cares about being on the right side of a shipping debate. Anyways, that's all from me. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next time.